The other team that made a lot of offseason splashes on the positive end comes in at number 2, and that's the Chicago Bears. Again, 2 teams picking 1 and 3 at quarterback 2 years ago, and A's and A pluses and A minuses across the board from all sources here. 3.93 GPA for the Bears. They revamped their offensive line. I think their draft was a little hit or miss as far as general perception around it, but getting Colston Loveland and Luther Burden with their first 2 picks, couple playmakers for Caleb Williams. I think the biggest one, though, Ben Johnson coming in as head coach, as you said, it's the totality of all the moves, and then really attacking the offensive line early in free agency and with trades.
Yeah. The Ben Johnson thing is huge. I think you start off with that, right? Like that's part of an offseason for a team and a front office and an ownership is, okay, we need a new regime here, a new head coach. Who do we go get? Ben Johnson has been the prize for the last few years, and the Bears are the first team that's actually been able to prize him away from the Detroit Lions. For the last couple of years, he would have been a head coach, I think, if he was willing to do it. Teams were willing to or trying to get him to take that job, and he's been going back, time after time. The Bears were the team that got him to say yes. So that I think is huge for Chicago. Obviously, we know it doesn't mean he'll be a good head coach, but right now you have to give them credit for achieving the thing that a lot of other teams have been trying to achieve for the past few years. They convinced Ben Johnson that they were the team that he was willing or happy to be the head coach of. I think the connection or the potential connection of him and Caleb Williams has to excite everybody as well. And then I think they did really good work rebuilding that offensive line immediately. Big question mark, and it's still a question mark because we don't know how much Caleb Williams influences that. But, they went out immediately and said, all right, we did good work last year putting some receiving weaponry around Caleb Williams. It didn't work. Now let's go really hard on the offensive line, make sure that he's got a good platform to work from. And then I love their draft. Look, Colston Loveland in the first round, dynamic talent, not necessarily one people thought was going to be going to Chicago. And then I think Luther Burden, following that in the second, has the potential to be an absolute steal if, he sort of keeps his head on and keeps focused. I mean, that guy's talent is unreal.
Yeah, so look, I think there's a reason why the Bears are this high. Getting Joe Thuney, getting the perceived top center in Drew Dahlman, that was just a great start. Added some defensive line depth as well. Grady Jarrett coming in after getting released from the Falcons. Both lines of scrimmage for the Bears, and then of course the coaching moves with Ben Johnson. So that's why they're up that high, Sam. Number 12 is the Vikings. And when we talk about splashy moves, or when you shore up position groups of need, usually you get higher grades. So they're 12th here. Maybe it's just because they only had a handful of draft picks, but the way they attacked the offensive and defensive lines this offseason, I thought would give the Vikings a better grade. And I can't imagine most people grading were like, man, you really missed out by not bringing back Sam Darnold. I think they made the expected move there, letting Sam Darnold walk, rolling with J.J. McCarthy, and then taking the extra resources, shoring up the interior of the offensive line and the interior of the defensive line. I think they made all the right moves here. I'm surprised the Vikings aren't actually in the top 8.
I think definitely the draft, people did not love Minnesota's draft overall. So I think that's gonna harm their grade. I do think the Darnold thing affects their grade. I don't think people are going, well, that was a catastrophe. I do think people would factor that in and say, well, they lost Sam Darnold, who played really well last year. How good a free agency period can it be if you're losing a starting caliber quarterback and we don't know what we're replacing it with in terms of how good J.J. McCarthy is going to be. I do agree, though, overall, it was a good offseason. I mean, the Darnold thing, I think, was understandable in any direction, right? Like, you could understand the argument of he played so well for so much of last season. Let's try and work out a deal. Let's get him locked up to some kind of middle-class quarterback contract. You can also understand that the last 2 weeks were so disastrous that you just couldn't re-up him anymore. You had to walk away and use that money and give it to J.J. McCarthy and blah, blah, blah. So I think, in my opinion, either way, I'm fine with that decision. It's just it's a tough call they had to make, and they did. Then taking that money and rebuilding the offensive line completely, I think, is smart. Like, that line got wrecked in critical games. It needed to be improved, and they went hard at it. And, made a couple of other little additions as well. I mean, not even little additions, a couple of other major additions in the defensive tackles and Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave. Those could have huge impacts as well. And then, yeah, look, their draft is unspectacular, but the most important pick is the top one with Donovan Jackson, who theoretically completes the overhaul of the offensive line.
Yeah, I say this over and over again. Very rarely will you draft 4 or 5 times like the Vikings and Commanders did, and people are going to love your draft. That's just not going to happen. The teams that draft 11 and 12 times are going to have more players that people like in the draft community, and they're going to like those drafts better. I think the Vikings made a lot of the proper moves this offseason, just like they did the last couple offseasons. I don't think it's funny because Kwesi been positioned as this analytics GM, and if you said, what's the biggest impact he's made, it has been by far with veteran additions, whether it's trades, TJ Hawkinson, whether it's free agency, Van Ginkel, Grenard. By far, it's been veteran additions and not the draft whatsoever, right? They brought in drafted Jordan Addison. What else have they gotten in the draft over the last few years? It's not much. And they've actually given up a lot of draft picks along the way here to get those veterans. So it's just an interesting dynamic. I think whatever models he's applying have worked much better at projecting NFL players to that roster versus the draft. And they haven't drafted a ton in addition to that.
Yeah.
And now I can't wait to see what Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, if he hits again, right? If Kwesi hits again, if the Vikings hit again with those offseason additions, it's a really good roster. Even if 3 out of those 4 players are nice additions for the Vikings here this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, they have not gotten much out of the draft in the last few years. Obviously, J.J. McCarthy is a big question mark at this point. We don't know either way. Dallas Turner didn't make an impact year 1 at all. That draft didn't do much. The draft before is the Jordan Addison draft, third rounder, second pick. Mekhi Blackmon looks like a good player, but tore his ACL. So that's another significant question mark as well. They're obviously Kwesi's first draft, like the top of that was a disaster, right? Lewis Seen, whether or not he'd have been a good player is tough to know because he had that devastating injury very early on, but he didn't. I mean, he was already outperformed at the start of his career, to get to that point. So the early signs weren't good. And Andrew Booth Jr., cornerback, was terrible. So not been a good draft history from Kwesi so far, but he's made up for it with veteran moves and free agents and all the other things.
So the Vikings are at 12. Again, I'm surprised by this. They're the last team with a GPA over 3, by the way. And I thought they'd be higher.
All right, that's enough of that, Steve. Over 50% of the people listening to this are not subscribed right now. So click that button, and then we can get back to whatever it is Steve's telling you about.
So next up is the Lions. Lions are number 22. This is an interesting one because if you were ranking off seasons the last few years, I think they're top 5. But this year, you're losing the coordinators. It is the first time, I think I mentioned this on Matt Coller's show, recording with him yesterday. We have been complimenting the Lions for years now. Their process, their draft selections, the way they've complemented their draft foundation with free agents, it's been outstanding. I would say this is the first year after 3 to 4 years of legitimate building blocks after building block after building block, making this team better. This is the first year where you can't say they clearly got better at their positions of need. And that includes coach. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't be just as good. It doesn't mean that they won't even be better. But they come in with more question marks rather than, they came like, again, last year at this time, could use a defensive tackle. They could use defensive line help. They could use a guard. They could use this. They could use a corner. And they filled all of them, both with free agents and draft picks. And they kept their coordinators. This year, they lose their coordinators. Still maybe don't have edge 2 opposite Aiden Hutchinson. And now with Frank Ragnow's retirement, have question marks at 2 starting spots on the offensive line. So it's the first year in a while where you can't clearly see on paper the Lions getting better based off of their offseason moves.
Yeah, I mean, the coordinators thing, and this is like, it's not like that's a a mistake from them, right? Like there's just nothing you can do about that. In fact, it's inevitable consequence of actually being successful is the good people you have in the building are going to get poached by other teams, and there's not much you can do about that. They'd staved it off for a few years by Ben Johnson coming back for a couple of years, but this year he was gone. Unfortunately for them, Aaron Glenn goes in the same year, and now you're losing both coordinators. So you have to factor that into your offseason grades. Again, not necessarily anything they could do about it, but this is where other teams get credit for bringing in coaches. The Lions kind of have to lose some for losing them both. The personnel thing, though, is a lot more, I think, hit or miss. On the one hand, yeah, they didn't address what we thought was their single biggest need, the lack of another edge rusher opposite Aiden Hutchinson, who, by the way, himself is more of a question mark now that he's coming off a serious injury. We're hoping Aiden Hutchinson comes back as exactly the same player he left as, but that's not a sure thing anymore. So, it's more important now that you get an extra threat on the edge than it was previously. But you did have a potential glaring weakness, a corner as well. And a guy like DJ Reed was a really astute signing to come in and solve that problem. So they have made some good moves. It's just that they've lost people. They haven't made the move everyone wanted them to make. And as you said, all of a sudden, Frank Ragnar's retirement sort of throws up an extra move that most people, even if the Lions kind of were prepared for it internally, most people were not prepared for that to be a weakness in this team.
I also think this is just where the Lions are in their life cycle, including, like you said, losing coordinators. That's what happens with good teams. You keep having success, you're going to lose coaches, you're going to lose, front office personnel. We've seen the Ravens getting people stolen left and right from their front office, and you keep moving. That's where the Lions are in this life cycle, both personnel and from a front office and coaching perspective, but especially from a personnel perspective. They've drafted so well these last couple of years. There's a lot of money going to homegrown talent in the coming years. It's going to be a lot harder to, flip a third for Carlton Davis to bring him in and pay him $15 million to play starting corner. It's going to be a lot harder to bring in DJ Reader to play defensive tackle. It's just going to be harder to bring in free agents and have feel-good off seasons going forward, other than, hey, they re-signed, Penei Sewell to a big deal. They re-signed Amon-Ra St. Brown. So that next wave of when they re-signed Brian Branch and they re-signed Sam Laporta and they re-sign all their good players, that's going to be the future here for the Lions.
This is what's so compelling, though, about the NFL and the salary cap and all the rules and things associated with it. The draft is like every single situation throws up its own challenges. Like you say the old adage, well, you just build through the draft, right? Just keep drafting well, it's all good. Well, okay, so the Lions knock a draft out of the park, and it's a potentially franchise-altering draft. The first 4 picks we've talked about as being one of the best players at their respective position already. And that's great. That's fantastic, right? You found these 4 young players. They're a part of the core, and they transform everything. But all of a sudden, you then have to start paying. You're only a couple of years away then at that point from having to pay 4 guys at the same time in order to keep them in the building, or make the difficult decision that we love this guy, we selected him, he's one of our own, but there's only so much money to go around, and we got to let 1 or 2 of these guys leave in the offseason, right? You never reach a point where you can do anything with no possible downside attached to it. There's always another shoe to drop. And the Lions have done they've done as good as anybody in the NFL in the last few years, since this regime came in, Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, of getting as many things correct as possible, right, within the realm of reality. And yet they're still faced with all these absurd challenges that, are difficult to overcome.
Next couple of years, if they're going to re-sign all of them, Aiden Hutchinson, Jamison Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, Brian Branch, and Sam Laporta. Just those 6. If you want to re-sign all of your players. And then I saw the chat mention, hey, Taylor Decker's not getting any younger at left tackle.
Right.
And then you probably can't pay a big-time edge opposite Aiden Hutchinson. So really quick, my quick sidebar here. When you talk about positional value, where do you get your starting tackles? Most of your starting tackles and your best edges are found in the first round. That's why, whether you need them or not, drafting first-round tackles and edges does actually make a lot of sense, because whether you need them or not, 3 years down the road, you might, and you probably need them on the cheap. And so at some point, if you re-sign all those guys, we might be sitting here 2 years from now saying, hey, the Lions really need a left tackle. How are they going to solve this left tackle situation? They still need that edge opposite Aiden Hutchinson. I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm saying these are the challenges that they're facing going forward. By the way, when they're going to pay these very good football players at where we said running back, safety, linebacker, very good football players at perceived lower positions of value.
But think what a percentage of your cap just that little group is, that little cohort of players is that you're going to have to pay in the next couple of years. And that's the reward for doing it the sort of the correct way, right? Building through the draft and, drafting well, like multiple positive things had to happen for you to be in this situation. And that's the reward for it is, oh man, this is a massive problem to have to deal with.
Number 24 is the Green Bay Packers, 2.35 GPA for the Packers across the four sources, C- to a B for their offseason. I think around the league, the perception's like, yeah, the Packers didn't really do enough. And this was a year removed from having one of the youngest teams, making it to the final 8, looking like the next team that's like ready to take a step, adding in Xavier McKinney in free agency, adding in Josh Jacobs, 2 guys who hit the ground running and made some big plays. And then this offseason, it's like, well, okay, Aaron Banks at left guard, that's the big move that they make. And they draft Matthew Golden in the first round. I think there's a wide range of opinions on Golden at receiver. But for a team that felt like they needed a wide receiver 1, probably feels like they need an elite pass rusher. Like they need elite players at key positions. Now they have cornerback questions with Jair Alexander out. So all of the high-value positions, receiver, say pass rusher, corner, I think they come in with the same questions that they went in with maybe Matthew Golden solves one of those spots because they drafted him in the first round.
Yeah. So that's the thing. These grades, this composite does not include no Jair Alexander. We kind of thought that was done, because this was a thing. The Jair Alexander debate has been all offseason. It's like, well, it sounds like he's going to be gone. And then they went through the draft and they hadn't moved him on. It's like, oh, well, maybe they're going to keep him actually. And then they end up shipping him off anyway. It's like, well, now that makes no sense to me, right? Like I kind of get wanting to move on from him because he's been injured a lot and he is potentially an attitude problem or whatever. I get the idea of we've decided to move on from Jair Alexander in entering an off season. I don't understand not really doing anything to insulate yourself from that in the draft and in free agency. I know they brought in Nate Hobbs, but like they had CB2 was a question as well, right? So Nate Hobbs is not the guy that allows you to move on from Jair Alexander, in my opinion. You don't draft the corner that would allow you to do that, and then you move on from him anyway. That doesn't feel like good process.
Yeah. So look, even if you ask Packers fans, is this a feel-good offseason? I don't think it is. Whereas I think last year probably felt a little bit better. They had some momentum going to the playoffs because you're coming off a year too where they were good. They had a good season, the Packers, but they lost to all the better teams that they played, right? They were losing to the Lions. They lose to the Vikings. They're losing to the teams that are better than them, the Eagles. And did they do enough to compete with the Eagles, the Lions, the Vikings, the best teams in the NFC? It doesn't feel like that on paper unless you get, a great stretch of play from Jordan Love again, or, some development from, I think they like their quarterback room, but yeah, they're just going in with more uncertainty than some other teams.
And I think the Aaron Banks thing is also counting against them a lot as well. Like that felt like a significant overpay. The money, the way it was sort of reported is not necessarily real, but like the defense, like everyone immediately leapt to the defense of this deal being like, nah, don't worry. The money's not that much. Nobody defended it literally nobody was out there saying Aaron Banks is just as good a player as this money, right? That's significant, right? When your justification for the move is not, no, you're being unreasonable. He's actually worth the money that was reported. It's not, don't worry, that money was fake. He's actually on a lot less money than that. We can get rid of him pretty quickly. That doesn't say good move. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.